It was just a regular Tuesday night, or so I thought. The day had been uneventful, the kind where you finish up work, have a quick dinner, and retreat into the solitude of your home. I was alone, just me and the hum of the computer. The hours passed as I got lost in the digital world, but then something broke the tranquility. A noise, a faint, indistinct sound that seemed to seep from the basement. I shrugged it off initially, telling myself it was just the house settling or perhaps a stray cat that had snuck in through a window left ajar. It was easier to believe in the ordinary, to trust in the familiar, but the noise persisted. It wasn't loud, but it was there. A soft, irregular scratching that would ebb away, only to return minutes later. My rational mind tried to dismiss it, to chalk it up to the wind or the plumbing or any number of mundane explanations. But the more I heard it, the more it gnawed at me. The sound was like a whisper in the back of my mind, a subtle, sinister undercurrent to the otherwise peaceful evening. As the minutes ticked by, it became harder to ignore. The rhythm of the noise was unsettling, a slow, methodical scrape, scrape, scrape that seemed to echo through the stillness of the house. I turned down the volume of my computer, straining my ears to pinpoint the source of the sound. It was definitely coming from the basement. It was a chilling realization. The idea of some unknown entity lurking in the depths of my home was enough to send a shiver down my spine. Yet curiosity is a powerful force. Fear, too, can be a potent motivator. The combination of the two was impossible to resist. It was like a siren's call, drawing me towards the unknown, towards the source of the sound. But as the noises grew louder, I decided to investigate. The calm of the evening had been shattered. The ordinary had given way to the uncanny, and I, for better or worse, was about to step into the unknown. Armed with nothing but a flashlight, I ventured down into the basement. The air was heavy with a cold dampness that sent shivers up my spine, and the musty smell of forgotten years filled my nostrils. I could taste the dust in the air as I moved deeper into the gloom. The beam of my flashlight cut through the darkness, casting long, dancing shadows that seemed to come alive in the corners of my vision. The basement was cluttered with a lifetime of forgotten belongings. Old furniture lay draped in white sheets like spectral apparitions, and piles of yellowed newspapers and magazines, their headlines a faded memory of days gone by. I shuffled through the room, my footsteps echoing off the bare concrete walls. The flashlight's beam swept over the area, revealing nothing unusual. I was about to turn back, feeling a little foolish for letting my imagination run wild, when something caught my eye. Tucked away in a dusty corner of the basement was an old cardboard box. It seemed out of place, different from the rest of the detritus. I didn't recognize it, and I was sure I had never seen it before. The box was covered in a thick layer of dust, indicating that it had remained undisturbed for a considerable length of time. I ran my fingers over its surface, the dust clinging to my skin, leaving a faint, grubby trail. The box was sealed tight, its contents a mystery. My heart pounded in my chest as I contemplated the unknown. What was inside? Why didn't I remember it? It was as though it had just appeared, materialized out of thin air. The basement suddenly felt colder, the air denser. Despite the chill, a bead of sweat trickled down my forehead. I could feel the hairs on the back of my neck standing on end. My hand hovered over the box, uncertainty gnawing at my gut. But curiosity, that ever-present whisper in the back of my mind, pushed me forward. Curiosity piqued, I decided to open the box. The box was old, covered in a thick layer of dust and cobwebs. It was wedged tightly in the corner of the attic, as if it had been purposefully forgotten. The wood was weathered and warped, but it held together as I pried it open, the rusty hinges screeching in protest. Inside, I found a collection of items that seemed to belong to a different era. There were photographs, the edges yellowed with age, showing people in old-fashioned clothes. Their faces were serious, their eyes staring back at me with an intensity that was almost unsettling. The people in the photos were strangers to me, yet there was something vaguely familiar about their features. Among the photos I found letters, written in a neat cursive hand. The ink was faded, but the words were still legible. They spoke of everyday life, of love and loss, of joy and sorrow. As I read, I felt like I was peering into someone else's life, an unseen observer of their most private moments. But it was the locket that caught my attention. It was old, tarnished silver, with an intricate floral pattern etched into the surface. It was heavy, heavier than it should be, and when I picked it up, it was strangely warm against my skin. There was a photo inside, a young woman, her hair in an elaborate updo, her eyes the same intense gaze as the people in the photos. The moment I held the locket, I felt a shiver run down my spine. The air around me seemed to thicken, and the light in the room dimmed. It was as if I had stepped into a different time, a different place. The sense of unease I'd felt earlier intensified, a knot of fear forming in my stomach. I wanted to put the locket back, to close the box and forget about it. But I couldn't. I was drawn to it, the strange allure of the locket pulling me in. As I held the locket, the room suddenly grew cold, and I heard a whisper in my ear. I spun around, shining the flashlight wildly, but there was no one there. The silence was deafening. The only sound in the room was the pounding of my own heart in my ears. I could feel an icy chill creep up my spine as I stood rooted to the spot, the beam from my flashlight dancing crazily across the room. Suddenly, there it was again, a whisper, a voice so faint it was barely audible, like a breath of wind rustling through the leaves. I strained my ears, trying to make out the words, but they eluded me. It was a voice that didn't belong to any living thing, a voice that seemed to come from the very walls of the room itself. The whispering continued, growing louder until it was an unintelligible chorus of voices. It was as though I had stumbled into a crowd of invisible people, each of them whispering urgently into my ear. I felt a presence in the room, a sense of being watched, of being surrounded. But when I spun around, there was nothing. Just the empty room and the whispering voices. I tried to shake off the feeling of dread that was creeping over me. Tried to convince myself that it was just my imagination playing tricks on me. But the voices wouldn't stop. They were everywhere, all around me, closing in. The whispers grew louder, more insistent, until they were a deafening roar in my ears. In my panic, I stumbled backward, my foot hitting something on the floor. I looked down to see the locket, the one I had found in the unopened box. As I bent down to pick it up, the whispering voices reached a crescendo, a cacophony of sound that made my head spin. I dropped the locket and ran upstairs, slamming the basement door behind me. The silence in the house was a stark contrast to the chaos I had left behind in the basement. But the whispering voices were still there, echoing in my mind. I spent the rest of the night with every light in the house on, huddled in the living room. The silence of the night was broken only by the ticking of the clock and the strange sounds that seemed to echo from the walls. The shadows danced around, as if they were alive, and I could feel an eerie presence, a chilling sensation that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. I kept glancing at the unopened box lying on the table. It seemed to stare back at me like an uninvited guest, a tangible reminder of the horror that unfolded earlier. The whisper, the voice that seemed to come from the box, echoed in my mind, sending a shiver down my spine. It felt like the whisper was still lingering, hiding in the corners of the room, waiting for the lights to go out. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest. Every creak of the wooden floor, every rustle of the leaves outside, every gust of wind that howled through the trees amplified my fear. I tried to distract myself, tried to convince myself it was just my imagination playing tricks on me. But the dread was too real, too palpable. I picked up my phone and dialed my friend's number. I hesitated before hitting the call button, wondering if I was sounding too paranoid. But I needed someone else, someone real, to break the solitude that was consuming me. I explained everything to him, my voice trembling as I recounted the events. He agreed to come over the next day, and his assurance brought some comfort, but the fear remained. As the night wore on, my eyes grew heavy. Exhaustion was taking over, pulling me towards sleep. But the fear of the unknown, of the whispers and the shadows, kept me awake. I was trapped in this state of half awake, half asleep, where reality blurred with nightmares. As I tried to fall asleep, I could still hear the whispers lingering in the darkness.